Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. Welcome to the show Islam and Civil Rights on the Voice of Islam radio. My name is Talha Sami and I have with me Habib Shafiq. I'm an author and a doctor, and in the past several years I've been looking at Islam in the Western world. Brother Habib is an African-American Ahmadi traveller and reader. In this series we're exploring identity and what that meant in America in the past several hundred years. So in the last episode, we spoke about identity as an Islamic concept in the Western world and the complete lack of identity that was afforded to African Americans and into slaves. Naturally, what that meant, fast forwarding into the 20th century and the 19th century as well, is a response was needed. Now, that came in the flavour of Judeo-Christian responses, such as, for example, Alexander Crummell, Bishop Turner. Some of these people had strong black approaches to their Christianity. Now, of course, we're focused in on Islam, so that is where we will start. One of the segues into this, I would also say, is that in the bigger picture, what I have seen, before we dive into the factual stuff, is the themes of Afro-Indian cooperation. As sort of a global consciousness was developing, you can see people like Marcus Garvey in the 1920s constantly reference Gandhi, and you can constantly see Indian nationalists not only come to America, they're working hand in hand with African-American prominent civil rights activists. And, you know, Islam is ultimately the thing that binds the two together.
Yes.
So you look at the massacres that occurred sort of in India, for example, at Jallianwala Bagh, you look at the lynchings that occurred countless times of African Americans. So there was this shared tribulation and pain. Now, Islamically, this spawned off various thinkers such as Blyden, such as Du Bois, such as Duzi Muhammad Ali, who then would work with Garvey, and the two of them together would actually interact with the Ahmadiyya Muslim community that was worldwide at that time in England and in America. Now, just a little bit about these figures. For example, if we take Blyden, you know, he's quite a good example. Strong Christian, grown up in a Christian environment, formative years as a Presbyterian minister. He visits the Middle East and suddenly becomes enamored with Islam. He's then writing Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. And he even has a stubble play where he likely became Muslim, but for the purposes of getting his allowance and
inheritance.
So, you know, similarly, Duzi Muhammad Ali understood right here in London 100 years ago in 1910 all the way to 1920. He understood that Islam was a transnational force and it was bound by the language of Arabic. Obviously, being a Muslim himself, he was a symbol of transnational identity. You know, Sudanese, Egyptian. He's in London at the time of the Turkish Caliphate. He's talking about Islam. He's linking up with Ahmadi thinkers in London. He's attending the Ahmadi mosque. Ahmadi thinkers are talking to him. They're entering dialogue, going to parliaments and congresses and such of the sort. From him comes Marcus Garvey, a very important figure in American history. Now, perhaps you could tell us a bit about Marcus Garvey and just why is he remembered so powerfully in America now?
While I'm not an expert on Marcus Garvey, I would just simply say that he dared to speak to people and remind them that they should not become comfortable and complacent with just mediocre promises of the American dream. And while he was, how can I say it, sort of an outsider who came to America and sort of immersed himself into the day-to-day sufferings and struggles of African Americans in some of the larger metropolitan areas. I remember him most, and what affects me most was his bold approach to reminding those individuals that you have something, you have greatness inside of you, and things have happened to you that have caused you to forget it and to settle for mediocrity, to settle for someone doing something for you, when the fact of the matter is you came from great civilizations and a great promise. And people began to listen to this and to become, and of course he was much more, how can I say it, much more complexed and much more effective than what I'm narrating here. But I think the big thing is he put up this mirror and he showed individuals this. Is this really who you want to look like? Is this really all you have inside? Is this really enough for you? And if it is not, then you need to look deeper. And maybe that look deeper would allow us to look somewhere else. And maybe this somewhere else is not necessarily here in America.
I mean, he was a tremendous organizer, wasn't he? You know, having a children's arm, having a cruise line, having almost weekly newspaper, setting up organization after organization across the country, constant FBI interference into his life and affairs. But it's interesting, despite it being possibly the largest African American organization, you know, he had his shortcomings because he had his difficulties with Du Bois. You know, eventually he would be deported from the country, although that may have been implicating the government in that, and they may have sought to deport him because of how active he was.
The old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We have seen throughout the American civil struggle and movements that a very effective tactic is to take that charismatic person, and nobody could disargue that Marcus Garvey, beyond what he was saying, was extraordinarily charismatic and was seemingly effective. But the important thing here is that the FBI at the time was literally pretty much running the manner in which America could be exemplified socially. It is said that then the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, presidents were afraid of him, that he had dossiers on everything and everybody, and he had his own closeted things. But back to the point here, it is always easy to try to find that thing from that leader that they will use to either discredit him, to deport him, to IRS him, somehow marginalize his voice. But what they were not seeing was that these large individuals, which Garvey and others were bringing together. See, once you get me to look at myself in the mirror, economically and politically and civilly, it beckons the question, okay, is this the whole total purpose of my creation? And then here comes this man named Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who the genius of our second Khalifa and sent him to America at that particular time when America was now listening. Not just white America, but Black America, marginalized communities were listening. And he was saying, look, Islam has this solution. Your Constitution starts off by saying, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Or if you look at the Emancipation Proclamation that would come down later. All of these were promises that were broken. And those earlier charismatic leaders saying, hey, look how many treaties that white America had with the Native American. These were civil treaties. These were legal binding treaties. Did they keep their word? So what Mufti Saab saw very clearly was that when he was sent to America, our second Khalifa gave him this extraordinary mandate. And in that mandate, when he came, he would show individuals, here's what America is saying. Here's what America has done to you. Here's what Islam is offering. Here's what the Holy Quran is offering you. Have a look. You compare. I'm having a meeting here on such and such a time. Come by and let's discuss it.
And what's very interesting is he did some of this in the women's section as well.
Absolutely.
And he was targeting black newspapers, and then he would target the women's section in them.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, the people who are probably thought about least in American society are black women and given the least status, right? So look at the status he was targeting them with. But I say all of that in hearing what you said to say that there were so many different responses, whether it was Garvey, Du Bois, whether it was Cramwell, whoever it was. And then the message of Islam truly hadn't come in the purest form in terms of practice and ritual and ideals until he got there. He surveyed what was happening in all these previous thinkers and movements, and then he was able to synchronize and work with them, right?
That's correct. The bold thing about Mufti Muhammad Sadiq was that he articulated and reflected in real time as an observer, he was almost like an investigative journalist. He would say, here's what's going on. Is this America? And if it is not, what is the solution? Islam says this about this. And he said something in one of his writings that was so powerful that I remember. He said, "Dear American Negro, this white supremacist Christianity,
these Christian profiteers ripped you from your land,
from your language, from your culture.
Forget Christianity now. Leave it. It's served you no good. Join Islam.
It hasn't served you."
Mm.
And when you come from that and you look at that and you say, okay, here's Garvey's and others are saying, I should do this, I should do X, I should do Y. And when I'm here in America and see others who can come and do that, but I'm not allowed to do it yet. I was bought here as a slave, etc. There's something wrong with that. And this was that appeal. And it not only just appealed to people of color. There were people who were not of color who were attracted to this message that, wait a minute, Christianity is this. There's a very, very strong contradiction, but more importantly, hypocrisy rooted in it to maintain this ugly status quo. And particularly when America began to promulgate laws, civil laws, to maintain it. The professional police in the United States came from the early slave catchers. Mm. They evolved from that into the so-called police force and things that we're seeing today. And if we look at some of the unfortunate things that are happening in societies, we see almost a throwback of what was occurring back then. But the point here that I'm just simply trying to say, more than anything else, is that in the early 1920s, when the Du Bois, when the Garveys were shining this light to have the marginalized individuals to look inward, When they started to look inward, Dr. Saab, they just didn't see an economic man, a political man, a social man. They saw a spiritual man that was not being fed. They saw a human being. This woman would see herself, this Islam gave me, said X, Y, and Z, and yet they see the contradiction. They saw the appeal. And this to me is why I believe that Islam had a stronger pull towards African Americans than the civil rights.
Well, this comes down to essentially the theme of this season, which is identity and civil rights that Mufti Sadiq, may Allah be pleased with him, he was affording, although he could not change Jim Crow segregation laws that he saw in his life as a single man, he was able to offer it in his faith space. So in Chicago, most notably, he was able to bring together whites, blacks, Turks, and I mean, so much so to the point that you look at the earliest pages of the Muslim Sunrise, a magazine he authored, the first picture of Muslim women in America is very possibly in there, and it's for black Muslim women.
That's right.
That Sylvia Chan Malik has done a considerable amount of work on, a non-Ahmadi scholar. So not only is he affording faith rights and space and civil identity, he is sticking with it, and that's a message that persists. So one convert in his era is Aliyah Ali. She came into a room of a mixed congregation, and because of the racial superiority and complexes of the time, the white congregation told Mufti Sadiq, get her out or we will leave. He stood on principle and they left. This is in his time. Now, that actually persisted on that kind of multiracial rhetoric in contrast to the later Islamic movements that were divisive in their approach and their appearance. And even when they were not, they just focused in on one single race, or when the foreign Muslims came much, much later in the 60s, 70s to America, they were ineffective at generating a multiracial organization like Mufti Sadiq, may Allah be pleased with him, in his time, and then the missionaries that came after him did the exact same thing.
Yes, absolutely. And what was occurring also was two very powerful voices. One was the voice of our then second Khalifa, who was writing some extraordinary things that poor individuals in India and places around the world were financially subsidizing and having them printed into English. And so the speeches of our second Khalifa at the time on these particular things, I remember my father reading to us Invitation to Ahmadiyya, Explanation of Objectives, these particular books that would break down various aspects of human. Then there was another voice, and his name was Sir Muhammad Zafrullah Khan. And he was assigned to the United States, but he also was a disciple of our second Khalifa. And he wrote an extraordinary, his voice, he wrote a book, I remember, called Islam, the Declaration of Human Rights in Islam. And being a part of the delegation there in the United Nations, he did the actual real work on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the early converts they heard a voice of our second Khalifa. They heard a real champion from Mufti, and then Mufti's disciple missionaries, and then these individuals who we never saw. I only saw them in the form of books that my father would get from Pakistan, and they would be these English translations of books by the second Khalifa. And in it would be these strong messages of human rights and etc. The other piece here that I think is noteworthy is that Sir Muhammad Zafrullah Khan was not only speaking of human rights in generally, but he was a champion for Pakistan. He was a champion for Palestine and Tunisia and all these other marginalized countries. And he put this extraordinary book together on verses from the Holy Quran and the various articles in the actual document that's still there, alive and well. I don't know how well it is in the United Nations, called the Declaration of Human Rights. But in short, Dr. Saab, what I'm saying here is that these individuals in America, these early converts in America, they had some champions that they knew about, that broader civil rights movements and papers, etc., did not. Most of them did not know or write about Mufti Saab. They did not know or write about Sir Muhammad Zafrullah Khan, and they definitely did not write about these extraordinary speeches of Khalifa Sani, and that they came out in the form of books. And so, in these books, it would challenge those Ahmadis to become a much better version of your humanity and manifest that and endure any dignity for the sake of your faith and righteousness. This became a higher calling than seeking civil rights.
So this is exactly to the heart of what this series is about. So civil rights and that search for civil rights, we often just think 60s, 70s, 1965, no. MLK. But what we've been really trying to discuss is that from the beginning of
absolutely
from the beginning of our religion, Islam afforded people civil rights.
Yes.
And that's what came to Africa, that's what came to America, and that's what Muhammad Mufti Sadiq, may Allah be pleased with him, introduced again.
Yes.
And I really would like to emphasize as well that in those 20s, when Islam comes for the first time in the modern age to Islam, when Islam comes for the first time in the modern age to America, it gives us these wonderful ideals we've spoken about. It's reshaping the language and the culture. Now, we'll come on to this in later episodes. And it's true that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community did not engage significantly in the boycotts, did not sign any declarations with the presidents, and it didn't get the grandeur of the press or the boycotts, etc., that other movements may have. But it was reshaping the conversation, and it made a spiritually adjacent faith-based movement that was not present from as soon as Mufti Sadiq got there. May Allah be pleased with him.
In my view, that's a brilliant nuanced point there, Dr. Saab. But in my view, and I'm not quibbling with that with your observation here. What I'm simply saying is, Islam Ahmadiyya could not embrace it because it was hypocrisy, and it was not true. Civil rights was a facade. We are still in America, 2024. We are still talking about marginalized people, people doing things to marginalize Black communities from voting in various congressional districts. So Islam could not be a part of something that was hypocrisy. So rather than jump on the bandwagon and be a part of these headlines and these photo ops, quietly what Islam Ahmadiyya was doing was affecting one person, one family, one community at a time, and getting them to see that righteousness is a higher ideal to pursuit in the human endeavor than a civil designation that can be stripped away anytime by any law, by any constitution, by any amendment. So Islam, in my view, like we had individuals who asked me, well, Muhammad Ali or this particular celebrity or a basketball player, or et cetera, et cetera. Islam, the Holy Prophet ﷺ, it never galvanized, needed these celebrities or needed these big splashes to validate its truth. Its truth came from Allah. This is a perfect book. It's no doubt in it. It is a guidance for the righteous. Oh, ye believe who believe. If you want to be this, spend out of that which. This is why these early converts, whether they lived in India, whether they lived in Pakistan, whether they lived in America, in the South, this is why those early Muslims sacrificed with respect to their finances far more greater than we do today, even though we have more. They believed solidly that their future and the future of their children and generations resided not in a government giving them some civil designation, but what Allah says in His book, that if you spend in my cause, I will do this. This is my promise to you. And so this is why I believe, especially those words that were coming from our second Khalifa at the time, oh my goodness, they were so powerful and so reinforcing that I remember my father and members like him, that as soon as these books would come out, they would have these coffee clutches and they would get together and they would read out loud these and discuss and look at these particular verses and all these particular things. So when these appeals came for marching for rights and this and that, saying, what we are already free. We are somewhere else. If our other people need that, yes. And it wasn't like that they were against the civil rights. It was that they embraced something far more profound that was given by Allah. And they had a very strong Khalifa, our second Khalifa, who galvanized this, and with his writings and those powerful early books that came to America in English that were extraordinarily powerful.
I believe that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you for joining us. Please do join us again for more insight into Islam and civil rights. I would like to thank my panelists, Habib Shafiq.
Thank you very much for having me.
I would like to mention that the views and opinions mentioned by the panelists are their views only and do not necessarily represent the views and outlook of the Voice of Islam Radio. For feedback and more information, or to listen to this episode again, please log on to www.voiceofislam.co.uk. Up until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for having me.